Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Expert Witness with Doug Minor and Steven Palmieri, coming to you here live. And looks like Doug is coming from sunny California. How are you doing over there, man? Is that the sun pouring fresh in for you?
Yeah, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. It's awesome.
Man, good stuff. Well, glad to have you here. Always love doing these shows with you. And, for all of you guys who are watching us, we bring in this content to inspire you and give you some good contacts and some good information and, some good quality stuff that can help you grow your businesses. And Doug Minor, for those of you who may not know him, he is a qualified expert witness, a credit expert, actually, and he's particularly qualified at being able to assess damages. You were a mortgage guy back in the day, and then a credit repair guy, and then now you're an expert witness guy. And so Doug comes to us with an incredible amount of knowledge from the inside of what it's like helping attorneys, build their cases and put them together and, help them get that expert touch that they need. For those of us who are credit repair professionals, just being able to kind of understand from his perspective, operate your client file as if you were an expert, that's a good perspective. And also, if you're wanting to kick it up a notch and become an expert, this is the place to be. So Doug, we were talking before the show about some nice cases you've got. You've got a wrongful termination case you were telling me about. Let's talk a little bit about that, because obviously it goes beyond just the big three bureaus and credit reporting. I mean, your consumer report, it affects employees, right? There's all these non-traditional, these specialty type reports that have employment information, and boy, if you get jammed up in one of those things, it may not be so easy to find it out. So tell us a little bit about what's going on with this wrongful termination case, man.
Yeah, well, let's talk about a few things, actually, right? One thing I want to talk about is what you brought up there in the beginning. There's a part of what I do where you actually are trying to educate the attorneys on, let's say, helping them draft a complaint in certain cases, because what we do, right, in our industry, just because we're all the time, we don't have to realize that not all the attorneys that contact me are familiar with the types of cases that we have, or have ever even worked on one before, right? The second part, like where you're talking about a wrongful termination case, it's not, when I get brought in on a case like that, it's not about me determining anything about the termination portion of it. It's only the aftermath, right? So the case you're talking about, it's from the date of termination. What was the credit report and what was their credit profile look like prior to the termination? And now subsequently, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years later, what's it look like now, right? And then assessing. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really it. I mean, I guess in the sort of continuation of that is, hey, for all the viewers and the people training program and so forth, it's about, there's a lot more ways to, as a credit repair person, get involved or have relationships with attorneys that are in different industries, whether it be, a wrongful termination situation, whether it's a car accident, whether it's a breach of contract, let's say a Fair Credit Billing Act issue. There's multitudes of ways where litigation happens that aren't, like you said in the beginning. It's not just an FCRA or a FDCPA case, or it's about a credit bureau. It's far more vast than that.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're dealing with. So
that's what
So are you dealing with they got wrongfully terminated, so their income went down, so then all their bills went delinquent and that destroyed their credit? Or are you dealing with like the fact that one of their business credit reports, like one of these employment credit reporting agencies, has them in their credit report as having been terminated, like fired, even though that's not the case? So what exactly is the credit file issue at hand here?
Yeah, so you bring up a few interesting points. Let's say someone is wrongfully terminated, and before they were terminated, they had the income and they paid their bills and they had a good or excellent profile, and subsequently they're fired and they can't find employment And so now their incomes, because of the wrongful termination, their income's gone down, their profile gets messed up. But you kind of hit on an interesting point in that we all kind of understand, let's say, the snowball effect of being late on something, and let's say creditors start cutting limits or canceling cards and things of that nature. So it just continues to spiral downward. But the issue I think I want to point out from what you just said is the different types of credit reports. And let's say you're trying to apply for a new job. Well, in a lot of cases, they're going to run your credit reports, right? And you're taught through, whether it's Credit Con or whatever credit information, wherever you get it from, or whatever, whoever's speaking, it's, an employment credit report doesn't have scores, right? That's sort of a universal truth that everyone sort of believes, but I disagree with that, because I've had actual cases where someone had applied for a job at a bank, and the credit report they used for this particular person's employment was an RMCR, residential mortgage credit report, tri-merge. So it had scores, it had all that information. And so I just, to believe that all employment credit reports technically don't have scores, but wherever you're applying may have the ability to order a regular RMCR credit report or some other report that actually gives scores.
Well, that's a whole other interesting point. It's like the great thing about these lives that we do. It's like we just keep on going down the rabbit hole, and then it's like the next thing you know, you're somewhere completely altogether different than where you thought you were going to start it. But like, so obviously, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you have to have a permissible purpose to pull credit, which an employer would have permissible purpose to pull your credit for employment risk screening and evaluation. Well, the whole purpose of a credit score, or like your typical quick credit score, is to put into a 3-digit numerical score your risk of default on a loan. I mean, those scores are, there's all sorts of different like versions of FICO and stuff, like for your auto and your mortgage and your credit card and stuff like that. And so then it becomes a whole interesting question here of like, I mean, if they're just using a regular FICO mortgage score as an employer, like how relevant is that score to their permissible purpose and to what they're trying to do? I mean, how can they assess default risk of a mortgage as implied by the score to, your risk as an employee to like steal from them or do whatever, because it's not like an employee steal score. So I don't know, that just kind of came to mind as you said that. Like, is that even something that you've thought about? Is there even anything there in your opinion? What are your thoughts on using a credit score for a mortgage risk analysis?
You mean for an employment risk, right?
Excuse me, yeah, for employment risk analysis, yeah.
Yeah. So I think in this one particular instance that I'm bringing up, the job that was for was, if I remember correctly, it was having to do with being some sort of loan officer, primarily with SBA type loans and so forth. What was most interesting to me was the fact that he had the report and showed it to me, and they'd given him a copy. So it went against all the stuff that you sort of had understood up to that point of, no, an employment report doesn't have scores. When someone's telling you they're worried about getting you hired and they have the report in front of you that they pulled on him, it's more, okay, now did he get the job or not get the job? Was that a determining factor in him not getting his job based upon the score, not the data that the actual score, right?
So in this case, so the employer was the actual user, the one that had pulled the credit, like they had the permissible purpose of stuff, like it really was pulled by the employer. So they are giving actual employees like credit FICO scores. And so that is interesting. Yeah, it's definitely.
What I didn't see was whatever this person had signed to allow the permissible purpose, right? Like, how was it drafted? What did it say? That's what, did it allow for them to pull an RMCR report as opposed to an employment report?
I mean, I think it would be interesting. I mean, we're just kind of talking here, obviously, but it'd be interesting if the attorney on that case could maybe like subpoena FICO or something, and be like, hey, I mean, are your scores, you hold yourself out as calculating risk scores, right? I mean, they've got to be like empirically derived and all that kind of stuff to serve one purpose, which is its specified purpose. So if it's a mortgage score, it's supposed to, be used by the mortgage industry specifically. That's why you have these versions. And so, it'd be interesting if you could subpoena or even depose like FICO and get some inside baseball from them on the record as to like, I mean, is this normal practice? I mean, how do they market a mortgage score to a employment company, right? Like, I think that'd be kind of some really interesting stuff. I don't know. So
I think that Steven, I think the point of all, like listening to all this, thinking about it as we're doing it, it's to just let everyone know that's in your sphere, right? That there's other directions that you can go with your credit repair business, right? It's not if you're into and like you said, if they want to do expert witness work, just I guess I'm trying to plant the seed to say, hey, look, you don't have to do it the way I did it. You don't have to do it the way any other expert witness has done it before me. And you don't, I think that's what makes for interesting arguments and interesting opinions in cases where you have these credit experts that have these different skill sets and they bring different real life information to what they do. I guess that's what there's that portion of what I do where it's real life stuff because I've dealt with this for so long and dealt with so many credit reports and situations with people, to where I'm able to bring all of that to the work that I do as an expert witness. But
yeah, and I mean, because you started off, you did mortgages for a long time, and that's really where your specialty is. So you've got that niche, and we've talked a little bit about this before, but so many people that do credit repair, we all start off with different things. I mean, my background is I was in the car business for a while and I was a finance manager. I never did mortgages. Everybody has different skill sets. And I mean, so there's a lot of opportunity in the market space for folks, if they are doing credit repair and, if you're out here watching, you're like, man, that'd be kind of cool to be an expert, build on your unique strengths and then kind of go from there. I mean, it's not like, there's too many expert witnesses in the arena at this point in time. The world needs more of them. And if you can figure out what your little niche is, then, there's definitely some opportunities. So, let's talk a little bit about, I guess, do you have any, kind of juicy cases that come to mind that you think might be impactful for our credit repair guys, some things that they may be able to take away here? Anything that sticks out as a really good story that you want to share?
I'm gonna overgeneralize just in the sense of there's cases where someone has used a credit repair, right? One to be unnamed, but usually LL comes to mind, the two letters L and but they use different credit repair companies and the data furnishers don't change any of the data. And so it ends up in litigation, and then let's say I'm brought into it. Well, I want to see copies of the letters that were used. And this kind of goes back to one of the shows with John Watts about, being very specific about what you want in your dispute letters, right? And what you're actually disputing and being clear about it as opposed to being vague. I do see cases like that where, let's say it's been 2, 3, 4 rounds of dispute letters and nothing has happened, but then they filed a lawsuit, and then mysteriously the trade line doesn't exist anymore, right? And so I've seen that many times where something's been filed and then all of a sudden the trade line doesn't exist anymore, or the payment history is completely removed. Things of that nature where, I guess my observation is, well, either the trade line being completely removed or the payment history being removed, let's say, stop the damage that it was causing, but it doesn't stop the damage that already occurred, right?
Well, that's really interesting about removing the payment history, because we do see that sometimes, don't we? And I mean, you talk about maximum possible accuracy, which is what the FCRA requires. And of course, Metro 2 is their own industry standard format that they've created to conform to that accuracy requirement. And, Metro 2, in the payment history profile, the definition of how that field is supposed to report, it says you're supposed to report the last 24 months of complete payment history. So it doesn't like say the entire history, but their own manual says the most recent 24 months are required to be reported. And so, I mean, even based on their own industry standard for a company to go in there and a credit bureau to go in there and remove the payment history. So they've still got the trade line, like the other stuff reporting, but they removed the payment history. It's kind of like, oh, well, we can't really figure out how to make it right, but we don't really want to do what Congress wanted and actually delete it. So we're just going to kind of just play with you a little bit. I mean, does that become an issue or like an argument from your perspective on things like, hey guys, I mean, how do you make this thing less complete? You know what I mean? Like, how do you chop the legs off this thing but keep it in here? How does that maximum possible accuracy? So does that become an issue at all, or is that not even really an issue with things?
Well, just from what you just said, it's an issue, right? And I think there's different ways of looking at it, but part of it could be, let's say, in a report that I was doing, right? So pointing out those particulars, well, based upon the Metro 2 format, this is what should be there, right? And I think you're kind of sounded almost like you were assuming that it was directly the case was against a credit bureau, but it's not. That's not always the case. Let's say the credit bureaus or a credit bureau 1, 2, 3 may have been involved in the case, but settled out of it early, and so let's say all that's left in the case is the data furnisher, right? And so I think those kinds of nuances to cases, right? Let's say you're involved in a case and Experian and TransUnion are involved along with a mortgage servicer, the original mortgage lender that was servicing the loan. And Experian is settled out with the plaintiff, and so have the original mortgage lender. But let's say one of the bureaus and one of the mortgage servicers still are in play in the case, right? And so it's gonna that sort of information is going to may or may not have some impact on the way that you draft your report because of how it's showing up on the bureau's report that's still in the case, and then how is the servicer reporting the information, right? And has there been any disputes at this point, and from those disputes, did they do a reasonable investigation, right? So all of these sorts of questions and all the stuff that we talk about or know about can come up, but it's just the timing and the format, and then who's still involved in the case if they haven't settled out, right?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, you shared your story before about how you first got into being an expert, like it was a complete accident. I mean, an attorney called you and asked you to do some work for them on a case, or give you like your opinion or whatever, and then you did that, and then they cut you a check, and then you were like, what did I just get paid for? And one of your buddies was like, oh, well, you were an expert witness and you didn't even know it. And so somebody kind of sought you out because they figured you had some sort of value, some knowledge from your prior experience, and you were doing credit repair at this time, right? When that happened. So, for those folks, those CRO owners who are watching here, again, we kind of said that we all start with some level of knowledge from our prior background. I mean, even if some folks get into credit repair, I guess they've never really been into finances. You look at enough credit reports, you kind of figure out what's going on. But you said that obviously it's important what you ask for in the dispute letters. These general vague letters aren't really very good for, pre-litigation purposes or post-litigation purposes. So, if somebody is really wanting to figure out how to forge ahead and kind of break into that expert witness type thing and give it a shot, would it be fair to say like the first thing that they really need to get good at is creating really good dispute letters, like figuring out really how to find out what is accuracy and put the bureaus on notice of something that they feel really confident? Would that be the kind of the foundation in your opinion?
I think that there's lots of foundational pieces, right? That everyone in your group has, or I'm assuming that they have, right? Um, I think what they learned from you with the POAs and listening to John Watts and Mike Cardoza and these different people that are like yourself or myself, um, it's an interesting. I think the question is like, if you want to do expert witness work, where do you start, right? Because obviously mine was by accident. Uh, but after once I found out what it was, then there was a effort to, okay, let me lean into this and figure out what this is all about, and then what's the best way, how do I feel like I should go about it. Now, I'm not going to say that my way was the greatest way or the only way. Absolutely not. I'm not going to say that. But for me, realizing that it was interesting to me to do that kind of work first and foremost, and then the amount of money that I was paid for the time that I worked on that particular case was, excellent as far as I was concerned, right? It gave me enough impetus to search out, okay, what's this all about? Take an expert witness training course, spend the $5,000, and then it was like, and then from the first expert witness training course I took, the thing that really spurred me on after was during the mock deposition, the attorney that did it came up to me at a break after I'd been questioned on it, and he said to me, his name, J.J. Little. He was a great attorney. He's since passed away, unfortunately. But he was nice enough to come up to me and say, hey, if you want to do this kind of work, you'll be really good at it. He's like, you really handled it well. Like, you took those questions and you really made it to where even I could understand what you were talking about. And I don't have any idea what you guys do. And so that was enough encouragement for me to like, wow, okay. And this JJ Little was seriously impressive with his vocabulary. He had I don't know if it was a degree. He had a level of education with Latin and the command of the English language almost to something I've never seen before. He was just unbelievable as far as that was concerned. And he literally asked me a question that was so complicated and so hard to follow, that the only response I had sitting on the stand was, can you rephrase that question? What he had put forth to me. So anyways, whether it's seeking out an expert witness training course, whether it's, talking to friends that may be attorneys and that you can tell them kind of what you do and see what guidance they might give you. For me, if there was someone like if I could have gone to myself, whatever, 10 years ago or something, I would have done that. But since after that first training course, let's say another case or two came my way, I went to another expert witness training course from a different company, and learned other things from that course that I hadn't learned from the first course, and was exposed to a much vaster universe of experts doing whether they were geological, medical, car accident, everything you could imagine. And some you can't even imagine because you didn't even know it existed, kind of a thing. And they were kind of looking at me that way. Because
they're like, who's this credit, like a credit expert? I mean, say what? I can imagine, huh?
Even the person putting on the event was like, really? What? Like, what do you do? Like, he was dumbfounded by it. But over the years now, he's come to learn, and he's helped me out in different situations, and learned that, oh, okay, what I do is I don't know, it's valuable, right?
We've got a question popping in here, actually. Barry, man, I appreciate the question. And by the way, yeah, I mean, if you guys are watching live, feel free to interact with us and engage. That's what we're here for. So Barry, he's asking who put on these courses. So do you have some specific course names?
Sure, yeah. First one, it was, well, most all your people are gonna know John Olsheimer had done that one, the very first one. That was back in 2010. The beginning of 2010 was that first one with John. And then one of the second ones that I went to was Seek, And I think they're out of Boston, Massachusetts, actually. And they do them, they tend to, for whatever reason, I don't know where Barry's from, but they tend to do them in Florida for whatever reason. I don't, why they choose that, I don't know. But they happened to one year do one in San Francisco, which here being on the West Coast, I thought, okay, San Francisco, I don't know, what, a 6-hour drive from where I live to the north. So it was a quick plane flight, went up there and spent a couple days with all these experts and learned all kinds of different things. And then the other part, Barry, that I would suggest to him is, I read tons of books. I went through all kinds of books on report writing, on testimony, legal languages, things, because when you're thrown into these cases, there's a certain vocabulary that's used that you're not necessarily used to or not trained in unless you've gone to law school, I would imagine. Right. So there's that piece of it too. There's different videos that I've purchased. I don't remember the names of them at this point, but there's out there, and like when I teach my course to people, I just I've been able to cherry pick all the best pieces from these different training courses that I've been involved with.
And in fact, you've got a book that you've written as well. I mean, so and you do kind of like one-on-one coaching with folks, but is your book about expert witness, or is it more about your story?
Well, so now this is interesting enough. This I found this very funny. This just actually after one of the shows that we had done, some people had gone for that original book I did 10 years ago or so, Anatomy of Credit Scores, and one of your, I don't remember her name, a really nice woman had said, well, your book is $400 or $500 on Amazon. And I was like, what? That's crazy, right? Like, I happened to go on Amazon and look, and she was right. It was $400 or $500 for it. And then a woman in my neighborhood, I happened to see her in the grocery store, and she wanted my help. And she stopped me in the grocery store yesterday and said, Doug, I went to look for your book on Amazon. It was $1,000. She's like, what is it, gold? And I was like, are you kidding me? She's like, no, it's $1,000. And I said, okay. I said, don't buy it. I'll grab you a copy from my house. And next time I come to the store, I'll give it to you. Right. So, and I'll put the same thing out to anybody who sees this. I mean, I have copies of the book here at my house, and I'll sell it to them for the $7 just for the shipping it out or whatever, if they send me a check.
I mean, what a deal. What a deal. I'm sure Barry would have paid you $900 and he would have felt like he was getting a good deal, but pay for shipping. That's a hell of a deal right there.
Well, you're kind of, Steven, you're kind of touching on though, the second book that I've essentially written. I mean, it's one of those things where maybe I want to add in another chapter, or maybe I want to add in a little bit more to it, but I would say it's, let's say 95% done. This new book that I've written is more story-based, meaning I talk about stories of individuals or couples and situations, whether it's cases and the outcomes, and then sort of what's the lesson to be learned by this story? Is it, should I go to my FICO to get my mortgage credit score before I talk to a mortgage loan officer? Or is it, this is what happened in litigation and they lost or they won, or this is how much money they ended up getting, or successful, credit repair situations or debt settlement situations. It's stories that I've sort of accumulated over, let's say 35 plus years of doing this kind of stuff, whether it's divorcing couples or it's just story based. And in each story, there is links and information for whoever's reading it to go get the information. Right.
Yeah. And you said earlier that when you become an expert and they start talking to you and they use language that you wouldn't understand unless you went to law school or involved with it. And I can understand and relate to that. I've been in depositions with the bureaus before, about a dozen times or so, and dealing with clients that I've had that have sued for them. And like my particular method is for these cases, what happened was I would write the dispute letters, and then the clients would actually notarize them and turn them into an affidavit. So like there would be a page on there with their notary and it says, we hereby, turn this letter into an affidavit. So all the errors and stuff, it's not just Steven's letter, but it's now an affidavit that they, sworn to, it becomes evidence and stuff. And like, so in one of the depositions, like one of the attorneys for one of the bureaus, like, I'm just explaining this because they're trying to go down, or at least trying to dip their toes in the water of like, it's got to be written by the consumer, which is total garbage. That's not what the law is. And, we've done enough videos on that. The law doesn't prohibit the consumer from getting help. But in this case, it doesn't matter because it was notarized. So I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, they hired me and I used my professional help, but it's an affidavit. They turned it into their affidavit. And so the lawyer for the bureau, she was like actually coaching me with the language. She's like, so what you're saying, Mr. Palmieri, is they adopted it as their own. And she's like nodding her head. I'm like, yes, I think that's what I'm trying to say, is they adopted the document as their own by getting it notarized. And she was like, okay. And then she just moved on to the whole next thing. But that just kind of stuck out because you don't really realize that there are specific languages and jargon and vernacular and stuff. And it's like trying to explain this thing, and there's obviously a very clear term for it, adopted it as their own. But now I know, it's like, hey, so now I know how to explain it to people. I'm like, yeah, you can run a credit repair company and you can have your clients adopt your work as their own simply by getting it notarized. So she actually helped me with that one. She helped me figure out exactly how to explain this this business model to folks.
You bring these different sort of little ways to phrase things that may not mean much in your own mind, but from a legal standpoint, if you say one word as opposed to another, it can have a bearing on the outcome of the case, right? So yeah, learning some of that and reading some of that, or probably more importantly, like one of the things that before we started doing this today, I teach a continuing education course to attorneys, and it was interesting. I was doing a debrief with a few of the attorneys and a few other people after my class was over, and I was explaining to them probably one of the really important issues as far as being an expert is concerned is making sure that the attorney who has hired you will take sufficient amount of time. I would say at least an hour prior to a deposition or prior to a trial testimony, helping you with the questions that they think are going to be asked of you, right? So one of the favorite things that I learned, obviously, as an expert is, you can anticipate 90%, maybe even 95% of the questions that are going to come your way, but it's how you handle that other 5 or 10% that you're not prepared for. But if you don't prepare with your attorney prior to that testimony, that 5 or 10% might drop down to 25 or 30%. And then I think you're at a real disadvantage not having gone through and have at least an understanding of maybe how to answer something if you're not sure, or during that coaching session or let's call it a preparation session, with those questions from the attorney. They may ask you a question and you answer, and they say, okay, they might say to you something to the effect of, well, Doug, do you think you could say it this way as opposed to the way you just said it? And when they give you those little, at least what I do is I'm very conscious when they do something like that. It's, okay, what was the word that they used? And first and foremost, am I okay saying that word or not? Is it accurate to what I'm trying to get across in my opinion? Or it may get to the point where, no, I'm not comfortable saying that word. This is what I'm willing to say if I'm asked that question.
That's when they, as they're asking, they kind of slide that briefcase full of cash up to you, and they're like, is it possible we could get you to completely change your testimony, Doug? Okay, that was a joke, because I know, you got to watch what you say on this thing, but we do like to entertain here. So, but yeah, I mean, the devil is in the detail and the language and the words. And, for folks who have not really gone to a courtroom beyond, Perry Mason or Boston Legal or whatever, the practice, it's all about, they may ask you the same question like 6 times, right? And try to get you all slipped up, and you have to kind of keep your cool. And I mean, until the judge steps in or until they stop. I mean, it's really, you got to keep on rolling with it and stuff like that. So, but you had talked, a few minutes ago about, kind of um, uh, preparing the statements and preparing the work product that you provide for the attorneys and stuff. So let's talk a little bit about research for those. I mean, you've got obviously your credibility, which comes from your experience. You've got your knowledge, skills, life experiences, which help give you the ability to be right, the knowledge up there, the ability to be an expert. But then, I mean, you're not just going to like write a piece of paper and say, well, I mean, to a certain extent, you're going to write it and say, well, hey, based on my experience, this is how I feel. You're not going to word like this is how I feel, but these are the facts based on my experiences. But then there's a point where you've got to kind of back them up with third-party authorities, right? So, what do you have different types of authoritative resources based on like whether it's damages or whether it's FCRA law? I mean, what types of authorities do you, Doug, as an expert, like do you go to, to be able to really deliver that product to the attorneys that they're hiring you for?
Yeah, I like that question. It's, each case is different, right? And the research, or the amount of research or little research that's done on each particular case. But certain information, let's say I use a certain amount of data from FICO, right? Some of their score movement and impact, and recovery times in relation to how something is reported, so it sort of backs up when I say, if my opinion is that the reporting that was done is damaging their score, and it's damaged their score based upon the simulations that I've done and the credit reports that I've looked at. And this is also supported directly by the data I have here from FICO, from their website. It states X, and it goes along with your opinion and what you've done. However many sources or points of reference that's available to you, I do try to use them as best I can. But I think probably the more pertinent question is what do you do when there may be something that is in opposite or in a fight with your own opinion. Maybe it's slightly different. Your opinion is one way, but an authoritative piece of data that you might have may be not as supportive as you'd like, or may even benefit the other side's case. Those types of situations you have to take into account, and you have to let your attorney know, like, hey, this is some data that could be damaging to your case. And so let's discuss, if I'm asked this question, understand this is what I'm going to have to say. I think I've said this times. Doing expert work is not for someone who is wavering in their opinions about what they've put on a piece of paper and what they're testifying to. You cannot be influenced by outside counsel or maybe that's not the right way to say it. You can be influenced by something, but if there's data that changes your opinion, so be it. You can take that into account and change your opinion. But with the information that you're given, this is what your opinion is. Now, if something
you can't be bought. They can't buy Doug Minor's testimony. It's like this old accounting joke. There's an old joke for accountants. You go to your accountant and you ask him, what does 2 + 2 equal, Mr. Accountant? And he looks at you and says, well, Doug, what does it need to equal? So what you're trying to say is your testimony is not like that old accountant joke. You can't go to the attorney and say, well, what does this fact pattern need to be? Or I guess it kind of sort of is, but I mean, it's got to be provable with something, right?
They're looking to you as the expert. A lot of, a fair amount of times, they're looking to you like, where do I get this information from? Right. yeah, you filed these disputes. Let's get copies of the ACDV exchange. Let's see what they're using. Let's see the codes. Let's see when it was done, right? So there are these situations where you as the expert have to help the attorneys understand what's going on, and then also help you in getting the information that'll support their case and support your opinions, probably more so. You know, one thing, it's like, and you may have an idea in your mind and have an opinion based upon what you've seen, but if you are able to see more information, it supports your opinion even more.
Right.
Okay?
Now, do you have any like expert witness type directory services, if for lack of a better word, that that you recommend? Like as an example, Thomson Reuters has what they call Thomson Reuters expert witness service, and I've actually been listed in that thing for like 6 years. And every once in a blue moon, they'll send me like an email like, "Hey, we're looking for an expert on this thing. Is it something that you want to take?" And so like I don't even know what they call that, but it's called the Thomson Reuters Expert Witness Service, TREWS, TREWS. Is that deal? And so like it's a service where they've got their platform, and obviously they've got a whole boatload of attorneys that are their clients, and so they've got this little platform for trying to match experts with needs for experts and stuff. So I mean, are there different platforms out there? Like if somebody here, they're kind of wanting to, to kind of shop around, so to speak, at least just kind of get their name out there a little bit, with their specific skill set. Are there things like that that you're aware of and that you use, or do you not really use any services like that?
No, there's lots of directories out there, and then there's lots of services based companies like you're talking about, where they broker your services, right? They basically just tack on $125 an hour to whatever you're charging. But yeah, there are some directory, Juris Pro, Seek, ALM. There's different directories online that you can be a part of. It's a good question, and I personally, I haven't done as good a job as I would like to with that. Meaning, I wish I could tell your audience, hey, this is the best, or this is where I get the most information from, or this is where I get the most cases from. I don't have that specifically for your viewers, but I guess the simplest way to say it is, you could be in 4, 5, 6 of these different directories and spend, $300, $500, $600 a year on it and get one case, right? Or maybe you get, I don't know. I think it is, you bring up an interesting point as to, do you want, yeah, I think you have to look at it as like a separate business from what, if you're a credit repair company, are you going to add on this expert witness component? You have to look at it as a whole new business, even though it's an add-on to what you're already doing, and it could be a natural progression for you. But there's the marketing costs. There's lots of different, there's the educational costs. There's just the insurance that needs to be taken care of. There's all these sort of businesses that have to come into play, and you have to make the decision. Is it worth spending? Is it 10 grand? Is it 15 grand? I don't know. Everybody's going to be different with that, but marketing budget, learning, everything else that goes into it. Look, one case could pay for all of that. Typically, it could. One case could pay you $15,000.
And that's really, I mean, that's really the toughest part, is kind of getting really that first case where you become what they call qualified, because kind of what has to happen is, I mean, so we'll kind of back up for a second. I mean, so because you had said earlier, being out on the stand, it's not necessarily for everybody with all their personality types. I mean, if somebody's a little more shy or whatever, doesn't want confrontation, certainly being a testifying consulting expert, where you're actually going to go out there and give testimony, may not be the best thing. But there are, you can be a non-testifying consulting expert where you provide basically expert assistance to lawyers, and then really it's just between you and them. But they're not going to hire you to go out there and sit out on the bench, out on the stand and stuff like that. So I mean, there's different ways based on the different personalities there, but just to be able to get that first case, we're talking about the cost of advertising and things like that, but that's really the hardest thing I would say is, right. I mean, you've got to, so what has to happen is basically you have to have that case. And what happens is if it doesn't get settled at a point in time, if you're listed as the expert witness, you got to sit down on the bench right next to the judge, and both sides basically question your ability to be an expert, and the other side is going to try to say, well, judge, I mean, this guy, he's really not an expert. And then a judge will make a decision as to whether you are what's called quote unquote qualified. And if the judge says, I mean, this guy's qualified, I mean, he's been in credit for 20 years and he helps people every day and he's seen 10,000 credit reports, I think this guy is qualified. So when the judge makes that decision and qualifies you, that's when you're kind of in a different league. That's when you're like, you're the higher level of expert witnesses as opposed to, not qualified, you can still help them. But, so what kind of advice would you give to folks? I mean, like as far as the non-testifying versus the testifying, and just how much easier does it get once you're qualified? Did you find it to be significantly easier for you once you became qualified?
I would say, I think that obviously I can't speak for everybody else, right? But from my perspective, once I was qualified, I think that, like you said, it gave a level, there was a certain level of whether it's confidence or perceived capabilities at that point, that it could make things a little bit easier for me, right? As opposed to, your first case being qualified, right? Everybody has to start somewhere and have their first case. And so I I guess as a word of caution, right? That's the area where you need to be careful. If you've never done it before, it's your first case and you've never been qualified, and you haven't had any training, that would be I wouldn't recommend that.
Well, I
I
think
would kind of goes like I did it by. I wouldn't have recommended. I would have had the knowledge ahead of time.
I
As
think
to
that happens for everybody. Yeah, it kind of happens by accident. But I mean, I think also really, I mean, for the average person who's watching here, I mean, it's not like we're going out and they're going to do massive like direct mail campaigns to 10,000 attorneys like, hey, do you want to give me a shot? I'm green. But I think what's probably going to happen is, the average person watching, you'll have issues, credit issues. You'll have attorneys that you reach out to, and then the attorney's like, yeah, I kind of think you're right. I think I want to take this case. And then, oh, by the way, Doug, I mean, uh, I need somebody to be an expert. Nobody knows this case better than you. Let me list you as an expert. I mean, it would seem to me that's probably the natural progression for a lot of folks in here is, if they're doing credit repair, they're going to have their own client base to be able to use that as kind of that hook, so to speak, as they're going to attorneys. I mean, because I think that's kind of the thing. Everybody wants to have a relationship with an attorney. And if you've got these things, that goes back to what I said way earlier in the show, like what are those foundational things, right? I mean, because you don't want to be like going to the attorney, but your dispute letters are no good. You know what I mean? But if you've got really good dispute letters, there's a good fact pattern that's going on there. You're going to have that instant credibility when you go talk to the attorneys, and you're like, look, I'm Steven, and I've got this consumer. We've gone through 4 rounds, and I mean, clearly, here's the issue, and let me point out exactly to you, which I think the perfect pointing out to the attorney would be literally just reading what you put in the letters. Because if you point out the facts in the letters, like put that fact pattern in those letters and put everybody on notice of what's wrong, there really shouldn't be any reason for you to have to kind of like, wait, I need to figure out what went, let me get back to you next week, right? I mean, but if you're really keeping track and doing good dispute letters and putting the errors on there and keeping track of when they don't comply, I mean, I think that would be the next natural progression for most folks watching, is to use your own clients as that token to kind of, get to the next level and start to build those relationships. And if you want to pursue being an expert, talk to the attorneys that you're dealing with about that. What are your thoughts on that as far as, a viable option forward?
Yeah, a few things. One is, you're I don't know if they go to networking groups, right? Try to find a networking group that's mostly or if not all attorneys, right? Like you want to be part of a group like that, or maybe you can come and speak to a group like that about what you do, right? And like I say, you can lay out the fact patterns for the types of cases that may come up because of the work that you do. Um, I luckily for me, it was a conscious thing, but I moved my office into an executive suites sort of place. It's called Barrister Suites, and the majority of the occupants there are attorneys, lots of different types of attorneys. So I literally immersed myself in an office building full of attorneys that are right next door, right across the hall. And I developed relationships with a few of them, really good relationships with them. And actually, they've helped me and I've helped them, and they've come to me and I've come to them, and just sort of shared different information with one another. And so I guess the point is there's no one right way or wrong way about doing all this stuff. But when using those relationships that you have, or developing those relationships with attorneys so that you could be used as an expert if it's the path you want to go, it's a great way to do it. And by the way, having those relationships and developing them, some of, like we talked about, the vernacular, the phrasing, the words, you'll start picking up on it in communications with them. Or like me, I'm a pretty inquisitive guy at times. And if I hear something that seems different or odd to me, or I don't quite understand it, I want to find out what it is. Like, hey, well, why did you say that? Or what is it? There's been time, what does that word even mean? Right? I may have heard a word that didn't come up in my life before, right? So, I mean, I guess that part of it is I just have a joy of learning. You know,
Right.
I think what my observation, at least from the people that I've been around in my life, I've always had a affinity for those people, let's say, that are older than I am, that still have a desire to learn and incorporate new things into their life, whether it's from a 20-year-old person or a 50-year-old person or an 80-year-old person, right? I think there's still things that can be learned. And if you keep that open mind and you have a willingness to sort of be uncomfortable, I think that's kind of, we haven't talked about that, but that's a whole nother talk that I do about being uncomfortable.
That's where the
But
fortune is outside of that little comfort circle. Here's your comfort circle, and the fortune is when you're out there. And you talked about always learning. Ray Kroc, he was the founder of the McDonald's franchise, you know, but he said you're either green and growing or ripe and rotten. You know what I mean? So like, because when that fruit is ripe, it's basically on the verge of starting to rot, you know, but if it's green, it's still growing. And so true, you can learn a lot from everybody, even people younger, you know, like you were saying. And Lanita posted up that's brilliant. I think when you were talking about going to your virtual office and talking to attorneys and just kind of networking, and you know, you can't underestimate the power of networking. I've always done networking as I've grown my business, and you know, there's all sorts of amazing networking groups that you can find. I mean, BNI, you know, I'm in a BNI chapter. They've got like 8,000 chapters worldwide. And you know, meetup.com is a great way to go and kind of find, you know, what's going on in your area and stuff like that. And you know, find some of the local attorney groups, go to their mix and mingle. I guess I don't know if they have them now with COVID, but you know, the mix and mingles, and just start to meet people, right? That's I mean, that's kind of how you build it and stuff. So, you know, as we kind of wrap this one up here, man, it's been an impactful show. But so you do coaching, mentoring, training. You know, somebody wants to pick your brain. Let's see, Lanita says she's taking notes. There you go, Lanita. Rock on. We like that. So that's why we do this. Is for folks, you know, for you guys to get some good quality nuggets from it. So, you know, if somebody wants to reach out to you, I guess first of all, what's the best way to get in touch with you, Doug?
so you can go to my website, dougminer.com. You can email me at doug@dougminer.com. Call me, email me, just, you know, look up Credit Expert Doug. You'll find me. However anybody wants to reach out to me, whether it's Facebook, email, websites, I'll get all the information. I'll get back to you.
And you like helping people, right? And so, I mean, if somebody's like, hey, I mean, I'm kind of stuck. I don't know where to go. I mean, that's the kind of thing that that's how you kind of give back, isn't it? To help other people get ahead.
Absolutely. Like I love helping people. Maybe to a fault sometimes, but I really do enjoy helping people. I enjoy teaching people. I mean, basically teaching the expert witness stuff that I do to people, whether it's continuing education course for attorneys. I'm setting it up to do another continuing education course for real estate professionals, kind of with what we do as credit people, right?
Yeah,
Realtors, and they need continuing education as well. So it's a constant, for me, it's teaching, giving back, and helping people. And more, I guess probably the most satisfying for me is when I'm able to help somebody and there's a positive outcome for them, and it means something to them. So there's
right.
a life where if you're not willing to help yourself, I can't help you. But if you want to help yourself, then I'm all in. I'll do my best to help you. You know.
That's right. Yeah, they say help others to help themselves, but it's really let me help me so I can help you. I got to take care of myself so then I can take care of you so you can take care of yourself. And that's what it's all about, kind of the circle there of helping everybody. And of course, for all of you guys watching, we do have the pre-litigation training course, 30-day free trial, $99 a month, month to month. We've got over 100 hours of video content in there. We talk about Metro 2, the industry standard, power of attorney, disputing with the furnishers. Doug's actually a member of it, and we've got plenty of attorneys who are members there as well. And so if you're wanting to kind of sharpen the saw, as they say, and get some more skills on the industry standards, feel free to go to stevenpalmieri.com or reach out to me as well, steven@stevenpalmieri.com, and I would love to talk with you guys as well. So Doug, I think that's about it. I think we've pretty much carried this one to the finish line, man. Any final parting thoughts here before we wrap this one up?
No, and I just want anybody who sees this in your group, listen, reach out to me. It's something that's attainable and it can be financially rewarding, I think, beyond what you might imagine. And it's just a cool thing to do. Hell, right?
What's cooler than being cool is Doug Minor, baby. So Doug, appreciate you. We will see you and we will see all of you guys on the next one. And until then, you guys be good. Take care.